The Battle of the Boyne. This battle is likely something you've never heard of, and for kind of a good reason. For people outside Ireland and Britain, this has no relevance to your impact, yet despite this is the largest conflict to take place in the British Isles. It may not matter to anyone else, but the consequences of the conflict are of profound importance in British and particularly Irish history. Now, there is some controversy to this biggest battle on the British Isles claim, as some will tell you the Battle of Towtown, a conflict in the War of the Roses, holds this title, but according to my research this is incorrect, or at least it is probably incorrect. Let me explain. Historic records tell us 100 to 200,000 troops assembled on the morning of the Battle of Towtown, though it has been agreed this is likely a wild hyperbole, and it is thought the total number of troops range from 50 to 60,000 men. Here's where the probably comes in. We know for a fact there were 59,500 troops present in the Battle of Boyne, so there's a 5% chance my claim is wrong.
I like those odds.
Between the Great Plague and the Great Fire of London, the 17th century was a tempestuous time for post-Reformation England. And before we talk about the Battle of the Boyne, we must first discuss another great event, or even better, the Glorious Revolution, which occurred in November 1688. In 1685, James II inherited the throne of England, Scotland and Ireland, and despite his Catholic faith was widely popular with his newly Protestant population of Scotland and England. That was until he started trying to pass laws that directly discriminated against Protestants, and when the English and Scottish parliaments refused to do so, he simply suspended both parliaments and formed an absolute monarchy. James successfully installed himself as a tyrant for a record 3 years. Unfortunately for James, William III of Orange landed in Brixham in 1688 with 35,000 men and a fleet larger than the Spanish Armada. James, fearing his death, chose a slightly more favourable option of fleeing to France, where King Louis XIV, fearing the growing Protestant Union in Northern Europe, gave James 6,000 French troops to assist him in his quest to reclaim the throne. James returned to his former kingdom, but to Ireland, because the Irish Parliament did not follow the example of the English and Scottish Parliaments by declaring that James remained the king and passed a massive Bill of Attainder against those who had rebelled against him. On the 12th of March, James arrived in Kinsale with the French support. James would partake in several skirmishes and some minor battles, even taking 2 major Protestant strongholds, Darien and Enniskillen. James picked up some 17,000 Irishmen for his cause, most of whom were peasants and had obviously no military training. The recently coronated King William III arrived in Bangor on August 13th. James and his advisors deemed it best to protect Dublin because it was the Irish seat of power and was left undefended. Due to Dublin's poor defensive positioning, James and his men marched 40 kilometres north of Dublin to the Boyne River, just outside the town of Drogheda. Interestingly, the battle was almost over before it even began. The night before the battle, William was almost killed by some Jacobite scouts when surveying the forts. Fortunately for him, he was left mostly unscathed, bar a minor shoulder injury. James, with little military experience, decided to send 2/3 of his forces, including his best French soldiers, to his left flank out of a fear from attack from there. This would prove to be a major error in judgment. William had decided upon a 3-pronged attack and sent only a few thousand troops to his right flank, while sending 20,000 men straight on to attack at the major ford, and on his left flank William would lead 8,000 men to a river crossing. Neither leader realised that at rug range there was a marshy ravine that neither group of men could cross. James had just sent the majority of his forces to an area already geographically inaccessible to the Williamites, while his remaining 6,000 men were facing 20,000 men, bombardment from artillery, and 8,000 men flanking them on the right. It doesn't take a military genius to guess what happened next. After only several hours of fighting, James and his men were outflanked. James ordered a full retreat and his army escaped mostly intact. James and William would have smaller battles across the country, but the outcome of the Battle of the Boyne ultimately shaped James's future. The Battle of the Boyne ended with the Williamite victory on the 12th of July 1690. James once again fled to France. The total casualties is estimated to be 750 killed and wounded in William's army and 1,500 in James's. William would issue the Declaration of Finglas, which demanded total Irish repentance or the forfeit of their lands. Rather than surrender, the remaining Jacobites fortified Limerick and held out under siege until the following year. The 1691 Treaty of Limerick brought an end to this rising. But with James II still alive in France, William III's reign would suffer many challenges through to the end of the century. The result of the Battle of the Boyne would help bring an end to the War of the Grand Alliance, which is a war in which Louis XIV of France's expansionist plans were blocked by an alliance led by England, the United Provinces of the Netherlands, and the Austrian Habsburgs, which tipped the balance of power from the Bourbons to the Habsburgs. Had James' Catholic son inherited the throne and his son's son inherited the throne and so on, the future of Ireland, even Britain, could be vastly different, but that's a topic for another day. And in reality, James II was the last Catholic monarch in the UK. Perhaps the most obvious, but how could I talk about the Battle of Boyne and not mention the Orange Order? The Orange Order is a Protestant fraternal order based in Northern Ireland, created over 100 years after the Battle of Boyne in 1795, during a period of Catholic and Protestant conflict in Ireland, to uphold the Protestant ascendancy in Ireland, which, if you don't know what that means, is essentially what it says in the tin. Protestants, despite making up 15% of the population, owned 85% of the land and had total political, economic and social domination. The Orange Order these days holds a parade on the 12th of July every year to celebrate William's victory, where there are lots of other celebrations, including lots of bonfires and fireworks in particular. That concludes today's video. If you have any queries or want to notify me of any mistakes I made, please contact me in the comments. Thank you for watching.